That morning in Puebla dawned like so many others, with the constant murmuring of pigeons on my neighbor's roof and the bells of San Pedro Church ringing in the distance. The air was still fresh because the sun was just peeking out behind the orange-tiled roofs. I opened my eyes slowly, stretched my legs, stiff with age, and sat up from the iron bed that creaked every time I moved. The old, quiet house smelled of dampness and coffee from the night. Before, I lit the stove and placed my old pewter coffee pot over the flame. The ground coffee had been brewing since the previous afternoon. I poured water, and soon the kitchen was filled with that intense aroma that has accompanied me for decades. I picked up the cup with its worn rim and went out to the small patio of the house. The morning air gently hit my face. In front of me, the maguey plants and cacti I planted years ago stood tall, bathed in the golden light of dawn. As the coffee was heating, I heard a man on his bicycle, carrying a steaming pot, shout, "Veracruz tamales, warm tamales." Then his raspy voice echoed down the deserted street. I signaled to him, and he stopped. I bought a sweet one with raisins still wrapped in its banana leaf. I took it to the patio, unwrapped it patiently, and ate it slowly, letting the sweet flavor awaken me completely. Not long after, I heard someone knocking on the gate. It was the messenger, a young man who already knew me by sight. He handed me some envelopes, commercial advertisements, a gas bill, and a phone bill. Nothing relevant. I left them on the table as usual to check them later. Then something I hadn't expected happened. The living room phone, that old beige device that almost never rings, began to ring insistently. I slowly stood up, leaning on the table, and answered with a half-disbelieving hello. On the other side, a determined and clear female voice stopped my heart. "Dad," it was Esperanza. "Hi, my daughter." We hadn't really talked in years. I remained silent, not knowing what to say. She continued as if she wanted to stop me from hanging up. "I want you to come to Mexico City. Sebastian wants to see you too. Son, we thought it would be nice to get together this weekend, have dinner together as a family. I'll prepare everything." My throat closed suddenly. I barely managed to murmur, "It's okay, daughter." But before I could say anything else, she'd already set the date, Saturday at 8 o'clock at night. Then the line went silent. I stared at the receiver for a long moment, my breath coming in short gasps. I walked over to the shelf where an old picture frame hung. Esperanza, barely 8 years old, smiling as she held her mother's hand. I ran my finger along the fogged-up glass, and a knot formed in my stomach. I wanted to distract myself, so I decided to go to the neighborhood market. I grabbed my hat and walked slowly through the cobblestone streets. I greeted Dona Petra, who was selling flowers, and bought a couple of sweet oranges and some guavas at the stand of Don Manuel. The fruit vendor, they asked me, "And where is Don Francisco going all dressed up today?" I replied that I was going to visit my daughter after a long time. Several people smiled and congratulated me. Some advised me to drive carefully because the road is long and tiring. Back home, the sun was already beating down. I sat for a while in the yard, watching the chickens scratch in the earth. The memory of Esperanza as a child came back to me again and again. Her pigtails, her laughter as she ran around the yard with a makeshift shawl as a cape dot in the afternoon. I went up to the attic and took down my old leather suitcase. When I opened it, a musty smell hit me. It was full of dust and deteriorating fabric. I wiped it with a damp cloth and began to pack in some clothes, a couple of shirts, cotton pants, folded socks. Then I carefully took out a white shirt I kept for special occasions. It was a little yellowed, but still intact. I folded it neatly and placed it on top of everything else. Then I opened a small wooden box I keep in the closet. Inside were some silver earrings that had belonged to my wife. I thought about giving them to Esperanza. Maybe this way she'll remember something about her mother, I said to myself as I locked the box, as evening fell. I cleaned my old truck. I wiped the seats with a damp cloth, checked the oil and tires, and then filled up the tank at the gas station on the corner. The engine roared tiredly, but still responsive. When I returned, Dona Carmen, my lifelong neighbor, crossed the street with a tray covered by a white cloth. I brought you some buns, Don Francisco, so you can take them as a gift to your daughter. I thanked her from the bottom of my heart. We sat for a while in the courtyard. She asked me how I felt. I replied that I was nervous, but also happy. She looked at me tenderly and warned me, "Be careful on the road. We're not here for long journeys anymore." We laughed softly, although his words left me thoughtful. Night fell slowly. I locked every door, every window, and made sure I turned the key in the gate lock. On the table I wrote a quick list. Ask Carmen to feed the chickens. Leave the spare keys under the flower pot. Turn off the water heater. It was my way of feeling like everything was under control. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, remembering my daughter's voice on the phone. Between excitement and fear, I spent the hours staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the distant chirping of a cricket. I had a feeling this trip would change many things in my life, though I couldn't imagine how much. The next day I left Puebla early, when the sky was still pale blue and the streets were half empty. I packed my suitcase in the back of my truck and locked the gate, like someone leaving a lifetime behind. Even if only for a few days. The engine took a while to start. Coughed a bit, but eventually roared back as always. I took a deep breath and crossed myself before setting off. The federal highway stretched out in front of me, long and straight, with the mountains looming in the distance. I felt a fluttering in my stomach. I hadn't gone on such a long trip in years, and the thought of seeing Esperanza again kept me in a strange state of tension, a mixture of joy and mistrust. After an hour's drive, I stopped at a small diner on the side of the road. It was one of those simple places with plastic tables and mismatched chairs, but with the scent of freshly brewed coffee that filled the place. I ordered a black coffee and a bolillo with fresh cheese. While I was eating, a truck driver sat at the next table. He was a robust man with a cap and grease-stained hands. He greeted me with a bon appetit, and we immediately started talking. "And you, Dad? Where are you going, sir?" he asked me while he arranged his plate of eggs with chorizo. "I'm going to Mexico City," I replied, "to see my daughter. I haven't been there in years." The man nodded with a brief smile. "That's great, sir. Family is all you have in the end. But be careful. The capital is a mess. Drive carefully. Don't let the honking horns pressure you." His warning lingered in my head as I finished my coffee. We paid almost simultaneously, and as we said goodbye, he patted me on the shoulder as if he'd known me all his life. That simple gesture comforted me. I followed the path. The landscape became more open. Cornfields, green plots where day laborers toiled in straw hats in the sun. I saw children running near a canal, women washing clothes in a narrow river. And all of this reminded me of the years when Esperanza played in the puddles after the rain. Those memories came to me suddenly, as if the road were tearing them from my memory and placing them before my eyes. Around noon, I stopped at a gas station. I filled up the tank, bought a bottle of cold water, and rinsed my face in the on-site bathroom. The cool water gave me some energy back. In the adjacent store, there were people buying chips, soda, and cigarettes. I just watched from a distance, feeling strange, as if all the hustle and bustle had nothing to do with me. The road climbed in altitude and the weather changed. As we passed through Toluca, the air was fresher, almost cold, and I had to put on the jacket I'd left on the passenger seat. The sky clouded over a bit, and the traffic got heavier. I started to feel tired, as if every curve sapped my strength. But the desire to arrive on time kept me awake. As I approached Mexico City, the traffic became unbearable. Horns blaring everywhere, heavy buses passing, motorcyclists zigzagging. With my age and my old truck, I felt tiny in the midst of that chaos. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying not to lose my composure. I remembered what the truck driver had told me. Don't let them push you around. After more than an hour stuck on endless avenues, my phone's GPS guided me to Polanco. As soon as I entered the neighborhood, I felt the contrast. The streets were clean, lined with well-pruned trees. The houses were large and modern, some with high walls and automatic gates, others with private security guards at the entrance. When I saw the address Esperanza had given me, I couldn't help but widen my eyes in surprise. The house was enormous, with a pale stone facade, large windows, and a black electric gate. The front yard had bushes trimmed in geometric shapes and a small fountain in the center. It was nothing like the humble house where Esperanza grew up, or even the apartments where I learned she had lived as a newlywed. I parked the truck in front of the gate and turned off the engine. I got out with difficulty, picked up my hat, and looked around the place closely. So my daughter lives here now, I thought, a mixture of astonishment and bewilderment. I rang the doorbell. A long musical sound echoed inside the house, bouncing off the walls, but there was no answer. I waited a few seconds, then rang again. Nothing. The silence was absolute, except for the distant rumble of cars on the main avenue. I adjusted my hat and walked slowly along the fence. From a corner, I saw a backyard with a rectangular pool. The water was so blue and still, it looked painted. Lounge chairs were lined up like in a hotel, everything too tidy, too perfect, as if no one was actually using it. The sun was already high and beating down hard on my neck. I felt sweat running down my back. I walked back to the front, placed my suitcase by the gate, and sat on the concrete step. The air smelled of freshly watered flowers, but also of loneliness. While I was waiting, 2 women walked by with grocery bags. They looked me up and down and walked on without saying hello. A man walking his dog stopped for a few seconds, but when I didn't say anything, he continued on his way. I felt the weight of curious glances, as if my presence was an inconvenience in a neighborhood where everything is luxury and discretion. Then a late-model car drove by. The driver rolled down his window slightly and gave me a quick glance, his eyebrows furrowed, as if wondering what an old peasant was doing sitting in front of that mansion. I pressed my lips together, straightened up a little, and pretended everything was under control. I decided to call Esperanza from my cell phone. The ringtone rang several times before reaching voicemail. I left a message. "Daughter, I'm here in front of your house. Where are you?" I immediately tried Sebastian's number. Again, the answering machine. Fatigue was overcoming me. I opened the bottle of water I had bought at the gas station and drank slowly, as if to stretch out the sips. The heat was becoming unbearable. Minutes passed and no one answered the door. Then I heard a familiar sound, the rake of a broom dragging across the pavement. I turned and saw an elderly woman sweeping the sidewalk. She wore a flowered apron and a shawl draped over her shoulders. Her completely gray hair gleamed in the sun. It was Dona Carmen. I couldn't believe it. She had been my lifelong neighbor in Puebla, and now I saw her there, in front of Esperanza's house, as if fate had left me a sign. He stopped sweeping when he saw me. He held my gaze for a moment, then shifted it toward the mansion. His expression changed from surprise to a concern that was difficult to hide. She walked slowly toward me, dragging her broom, and before I could greet her, she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "Be careful." I stood still, not fully understanding, but with a chill running down my spine. I was about to speak to him when he leaned the broom against the wall, dried his hands on his apron, and began to approach with firm steps. The air around us seemed to have stopped. I felt something was about to be revealed, something I couldn't yet imagine. And as Carmen took those steps toward me, I looked again at the silent, imposing house, closed like a fortress. And I was certain that what was about to happen would change my life forever. I sat on the gate step, sweat running down my forehead and back. I took out the cloth handkerchief I always keep in my pocket and wiped it over my face. The afternoon was already beginning to heat up sharply, and the air was becoming heavy, as if even breathing required greater effort. That's when I saw her. Dona Carmen, with her same hunched figure as always, appeared a few feet away from me. She wore a shawl around her shoulders and a flowery dress that had surely seen better days. In one hand, she held a wooden broom so worn that barely any bristles remained. He walked slowly, dragging his feet as if he were in no hurry. But when he looked at me, his pace changed. "Mr. Francisco," she whispered, barely approaching. "What are you doing here all alone?" I settled on the step, still breathing heavily, and answered the first thing that came to mind. "I'm waiting for my daughter to open the door for me. I told her I'd be here. We agreed to meet today." She frowned, glanced around as if afraid someone else might hear. and lowered her voice to a whisper. "They're not. And I should be careful." I felt a chill run through me. I looked up and found his eyes, which were fixed on the black gate and the security camera installed on the corner. Carmen raised her chin slightly, discreetly pointing at the device, and then waved her hand as if inviting me to cross the street. I obeyed without thinking much. We walked slowly until we found ourselves under the shade of a large tree in front of the house. The distant noise of traffic on the avenue pierced the silence, and I felt my heart pounding, as if it wanted to anticipate what I was about to hear. "You don't really know who your daughter's been with," she said in a low voice, her brow furrowing even more. "That's Sebastian? His first father-in-law died in a very strange way." I froze. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask in a whisper. Dona Carmen gripped the broom in her bony hands and continued quickly, as if she needed to get those words out of her system. "That man came to dinner here strong and healthy as a bull. 2 days later, he was dead. They said it was his heart, that it was something natural, but I saw it. I saw him fading away, as if something was consuming him. I didn't know what to say. I felt a pit in my stomach, a mixture of disbelief and fear. At that moment, a young man walked past us with a Labrador. Carmen stopped abruptly and, to hide it, pretended to fix her shawl. I looked at the ground, nervous, till the boy disappeared down the street. Then she resumed, even closer, as if she feared that even the walls had ears. "People come and go here at all hours of the night. Faces no one knows. They come in, and then you never see them again. It's not a safe place, Don Francisco. Believe me, I'm speaking to you to protect you." I wanted to ask him more, but at that moment, my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out and saw an unknown number. I answered cautiously, "Hello." On the other end, I only heard the whistling of the wind, as if someone were breathing into the microphone without saying a word. I repeated the greeting twice and hung up with a bad feeling in my chest. Carmen, her eyes wide and shining, picked up the broom again and prepared to leave. Before leaving, she whispered softly, "If you want to live, don't stay here too long." I've already said what I had to say. I watched her walk slowly away, dragging the broom along the sidewalk until she disappeared around the corner. I returned to my place in front of the gate, my heart uneasy, as if every shadow concealed a threat. A few minutes passed, seemingly endless, and suddenly I heard the sound of an engine approaching. It was a shiny black SUV that turned the corner and moved purposefully toward the house. My breathing quickened. The vehicle stopped in front of the gate and the doors opened. Esperanza, my daughter, got out first. She was wearing an elegant dress, the kind I'd only seen in magazines, and her makeup highlighted features I'd known well since I was a child. "Dad." She looked at me. Her eyes widened and immediately ran to me. "Dad?" she exclaimed, hugging me tightly. "I'm sorry for keeping you waiting so long." Her voice was a mixture of warmth and nervousness. I didn't know what to think. I only managed to respond with a muffled, "It's okay, honey." Sebastian appeared behind her. He was wearing a dark gray suit, his tie perfectly knotted. He smoothed his jacket with one hand and firmly offered me the other. "Welcome, father-in-law," he said with a broad, studious smile. "We're so glad to have you here." I shook her hand. Her skin was cold and her gaze too fixed. I pressed my lips together and looked down, trying not to be carried away by Carmen's words. The electric gate opened with a metallic whir. Esperanza helped me with the suitcase, although I insisted on carrying it. We entered the yard, and the SUV slid into the garage. The sound of the gate closing echoed in my ears like a padlock being slammed inside. The house was even more imposing. The marble floor reflected the lights. The paintings on the walls looked like they were straight out of a gallery, and a huge crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling. Casting sparkles everywhere, my old boots echoed on that smooth floor, reminding me that I didn't belong in that world. "We recently remodeled everything," Sebastian said proudly. "We wanted it to feel like a real home." I nodded silently, not daring to comment. My eyes fell on the leather sofas, the coffee table decorated with foreign magazines, the vases of roses that looked freshly planted. Everything was perfect, too perfect. I left my suitcase next to the sofa and ran my fingers along the back of it. as if to convince myself that this was real. Esperanza smiled at me, but I noticed her lips were trembling, and then, without meaning to, my mind returned to Carmen's words, floating like an echo. Don't stay here too long if you want to live. I tried to shake off that thought, to force myself to smile, but my eyes couldn't tear themselves away from every corner, as if there was something hidden in the beauty of that house. Something that didn't quite fit Esperanza, with that smile that blends affection and formality, took my arm and began showing me every corner of the house. We walked through the main room where a huge window overlooked the patio pool. The water was still, a deep blue, reflecting the afternoon sky. White lounge chairs were lined up, immaculate, as if they were for display rather than use. Look, Dad, Esperanza said with a pride. I nodded, though deep down this perfection made me uncomfortable. My dusty boots from the road seemed out of place on that shiny ground in the dining room. The long table was covered with a crisp white tablecloth. In the center, a glass vase overflowed with freshly picked red roses. The sweet scent filled the air, a little too strong for my taste. As if trying to cover up any other smell, Sebastian appeared behind us, speaking in a firm voice. Like someone boasting about what he has achieved, we brought these paintings from a gallery in Madrid. We bought this other one on a trip to Florence. And here, look, a limited edition tequila, just 200 bottles in all of Jalisco. I listened, watched, nodded, but my stomach reminded me that I hadn't eaten anything since Toluca. Hunger gnawed at me, mixed with a dull tiredness. Esperanza noticed right away. Dad, you're probably exhausted. I'll make you something light. I watched her as she walked into the kitchen. Sebastian followed her, but his phone rang suddenly. He answered immediately and went out into the hallway, speaking in a low but tense voice. I seized the moment. I went to the kitchen looking for a glass of water. It was enormous, bigger than any kitchen I'd ever seen. All stainless steel, stoves, refrigerators, extractor hoods. It gleamed like no one actually cooked in there. The smell was strange, a mixture of soap, reheated food, and something metallic I couldn't recognize. I opened a cabinet near the sink to look for a glass. I found bottles of cleaners, bleach, and disinfectant. I bent down a little further and slid the door all the way back. That's when I saw it. Small brown glass bottle with a faded label. I couldn't read it properly. Paracetamol, it said. Restricted use. I felt my blood run cold. My hands began to shake. I replaced the bottle, slammed the cabinet shut, and stood for a moment leaning against the sink, taking a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. At that very moment, Esperanza returned with a tray. She was carrying small vanilla cupcakes decorated with powdered sugar. Eat something, it will do you good, he said, smiling. Placing the tray in front of me, I forced a smile, even though my mouth tasted bitter. I took one of the pastries and placed it on a plate. I sat at the kitchen table, trying not to let my hands betray the trembling. Sebastian walked in instantly, putting his phone in his pocket. Just a work matter, nothing serious, he said as if to reassure me. Everything's under control here. He walked over to a filtered water dispenser, filled a glass, and handed it to me. For you, father-in-law. The trip must have been tough. I thanked him in a small voice and took a couple of sips, just enough to avoid seeming rude. My eyes, however, kept wandering to the cabinet under the sink. Suddenly a black cat ran into the kitchen. It jumped onto a chair and then onto the table, sniffing at the tray of pastries. Esperanza giggled nervously and shooed it away with a wave of her hand. This animal is always up to its tricks. He muttered. The cat's appearance helped me release some of the tension. I exhaled slowly, as if that little distraction had brought me back to normal for a second. Sebastian then approached the kitchen bar, took out a bottle of amber tequila, and poured 3 glasses into fine crystal glasses. Let's drink, he said in an enthusiastic voice, to a family reunion. He handed me one of the glasses. I stared at it. The liquid glistened against the light. I hesitated. Before she could say anything, Esperanza's phone rang. She grabbed it and almost ran out into the hallway. Speaking in a low, nervous voice, frowning, Sebastian took the opportunity to get closer to me, raising his glass. Come on, father-in-law. This tequila, is some of the best in Jalisco. Just one sip won't hurt you. I shook my head slowly. I'd rather wait until dinner. I'd like him better with.